There are some moments in history that feel almost too strange to be true. And then there's moments that reveal something deeper about a person that we thought we knew and already understood. And on May 22nd of 1849, Abraham Lincoln became exactly that. Long before he became president, he was granted a United States patent, not for a legal argument, not for a political idea. Remember, he was a lawyer, but for a mechanical invention designed to solve a very specific and very frustrating problem. But to understand why this matters, you have to step away from the image that most people have of the famous Lincoln. Before the speeches, before the Civil War, before the presidency, he was a young man working along rivers that were as unpredictable as they were essential. These rivers were the highways of commerce. In the early 19th century, they were carrying goods, people, and even opportunity across these vast distances. But they were also unreliable. Shallow areas and hidden shoals and sudden obstructions, any of that could bring a journey to a sudden halt without any kind of warning. And Lincoln knew this firsthand. As a young man, he worked on the flatboats traveling down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. These were not leisure trips for him. They were demanding, they were physical, they were often frustrating. On more than one occasion, the boat he was working on would become stuck. Not slightly delayed, not mildly inconvenienced, but completely and totally immobilized. Imagine the effort that was required to free a heavy wooden vessel loaded down with cargo, surrounded by water that was just shallow enough to trap it. In one particular telling of an incident, Lincoln and his companions had to unload cargo, physically alter the boat, and manipulate the situation just to be able to get the boat moving again. This was far from efficient. It was not reliable. It was the kind of problem that most people would accept as part of life at the time. But Lincoln did not just accept it, he remembered it. And years later, another experience reinforced the idea. He witnessed a steamboat stuck on the shoal, and the crew resorted to stuffing empty barrels and loose materials underneath the vessel just to be able to lift it up high enough, trying to free it. It worked, but it was improvised and it was slow. And of course, this was far from ideal. So for Lincoln, this was not just an inconvenience, it was a problem waiting for a better solution. So what makes this story compelling is what happened next. Lincoln didn't approach the problem as a laborer would. He approached it as a thinker. He began to imagine a system that could be built into the boat itself. Something that could be activated when needed, something that would allow the vessel to lift itself just enough to clear an obstruction without having to unload the cargo or relying on external materials like those empty barrels. The idea that he developed was surprisingly elegant, too. He envisioned expandable air chambers attached to the sides of the boat. When the vessel encountered shallow water or it became stuck, these chambers could be inflated. It would increase the buoyancy and raise the boat slightly. Well, once the obstruction was cleared, the chambers could be deflated and stored away. It was a controlled and repeatable solution to a very real problem that he himself had experienced, right? Well, by the late 1840s, Lincoln had refined this concept enough to pursue a patent. He worked with a patent attorney, which he himself later became a patent attorney, and he created detailed drawings and even commissioned a small working model to demonstrate how the system would function. The invention was formally titled Buoying Vessels Over Shoals. And on May 22nd of 1849, it was granted as patent number 6469. At this point, the story feels like a straightforward tale of ingenuity. A problem is identified, a solution is created, and the system is recognized through this patent. But here's where the story takes an unexpected left-hand turn. Despite the clarity of the idea and the effort that was put into this design through years of work, the invention was never actually used in practice. Modern analysis of this system has said that while it's clever, it may not have actually been practical under real conditions. Inflating the chambers with enough force to be able to lift a loaded vessel would have been really difficult, if not impossible, with the technology available at the time. I mean, in other words, the only patent ever held by a future United States president may have been an idea for something that could not have ever worked as intended. That detail kind of changes how we see the story. It's no longer just about his success. It's about the willingness to try and think differently and to attempt a solution even when the outcome was uncertain and when people doubted him. Lincoln did not abandon the idea just because it was difficult. He pursued it because the problem still existed and because it mattered to him. What is equally important is how this experience shaped his later thinking in life. Lincoln developed a deep respect for the patent system, not just as a legal structure, but as a driver of progress. He believed that protecting invention encouraged creativity and innovation. He even delivered lectures on the subject. He emphasized how patents provided both recognition and incentive for those who were willing to improve the world around them. And this perspective carried into his legal career. Lincoln then, of course, as I mentioned, worked as a patent lawyer. He participated in cases dealing with mechanical inventions and intellectual property. He understood both the creative and the legal sides of innovation. He saw how ideas moved from concept to application, how the law could support or hinder that progress. And there's something really powerful about this part of Lincoln's story. It shows a man who was not limited to one way of thinking. He was not linear. He was not only a politician. He was not only a lawyer. He was someone who observed the world around him, identified problems, and attempted to solve them, even in areas outside of his primary field. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway. He didn't stay in his lane. The invention itself may not have changed river travel. It may never have been implemented. It might not have even worked. But the mindset behind it reveals a willingness to engage with the world in a practical and creative way. It shows a belief that problems are not fixed. They can be examined, understood, and improved until they are. On May 22nd of 1849, Abraham Lincoln did receive that patent that stands alone in presidential history. He's the only U.S. president to have ever held a patent. It didn't make him famous. It didn't make him an industry transformer, but it left behind something just as valuable. It's a reminder that innovation is not always about immediate success or success at all. Sometimes it's about the attempt, the process, and the belief that things can be better than they are, and to be willing to try to make it that way. So now here comes the part where I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think this story should remind people that there's more ideas that can be tried, and people should be remembered for the ideas that worked, or should they be remembered for the ideas that they were bold enough to try and didn't work? It's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? And of course, as always, if you enjoy stories like this, make sure you follow the History Happens Facebook page. Goodness, because of course, history happens. And follow along on the podcast for history's most fascinating moments, and subscribe, because every subscription helps. And I really do appreciate you guys. And thank you for watching.